Picture this, a guy's silhouette against a deserted beach, waves just kissing his feet. It's 1948. What if Australia's most puzzling cold case wasn't about spies at all, but a massive intelligence blind spot? Hey everyone, I'm your host. I've spent ages digging through declassified stuff and dusty old archives, and let me tell you, what the headlines and the official story got wrong about the Somerton Man is pretty wild. Over the next 20 minutes, we're gonna blow up the foreign agent myth, expose some serious intelligence screw-ups, and reveal a secret radio code that wasn't a message, not really. Quick heads up, this doc looks at historical events and theories. We've changed some names and details to protect privacy, just how a journalist should. December 1st, 1948. Somerton Beach, South Australia, it's eerily quiet. A man dressed sharp is lying dead on the sand, his pockets empty except for this one little fob pocket sewn in real neat, and inside a tiny scrap of paper. Tamam Shud means the end. That was just the start of a mystery that freaked out cops, spooks, and the public for over 70 years. The guy totally unknown, his cause of death a blank, he just became this ghost in Australia's history books. Cops went all out, checked ports, talked to everyone, put his description everywhere. The military even got involved. The National Archives of Australia has tons of letters showing how nobody, absolutely nobody, could id this guy. Source: National Archives of Australia. It was a total brick wall. But soon the official story kinda settled on this really catchy, but totally wrong idea. He was a foreign operative, a spy, maybe Russian. This fit right in with all the Cold War panic back then. Thing is, the proof for that just never showed up. No foreign outfit claimed him, no defector pointed him out. The investigation files, as much as they tried to find any ID, just couldn't link him to any specific foreign intel group. Source: National Archives of Australia. Think about that Tamam Shud paper. Found in that sneaky fob pocket, it got blown way out of proportion. But even though it was weird, nobody treated it like a real radio cipher. Why? Because the experts and the cops probably never thought it was one. This brings us to a major moment, the Petrov Affair. Mid-1950s, Australia was obsessed with spies. People were defecting, pointing fingers, and everyone was scared of Soviet spies in Australia. The Petrov Affair, this huge espionage scandal, really hammered home the idea of foreign agents running around. Source: Australian Security Intelligence Organisation Act 1979. It's easy to just stick the Somerton Man in there, right? A foreign spy bumped off before he could send secrets. But what if that story was just a convenient cover, hiding a different, much simpler but still really important intelligence failure? The official report from the advertiser back in 1948 actually mentions finding that scrap of paper with Tamam Shud in the guy's hidden fob pocket. Source: the advertiser 1948 archive. But it doesn't hint at it being a coded message in the usual sense, not at all. That whole foreign agent idea, especially the Soviet angle, doesn't really hold up with today's science. Recent DNA work, like Professor Derek Abbott's research and later identification, suggests the guy was probably local, from the Melbourne area. Source: University of Adelaide research report identifying him as Carl Webb, a local electrical engineer in 2022, totally shoots down the old foreign operative theory. Source: Science Magazine. This is where the official investigation and the whole legend really went off the rails. They were hunting for a spy, a message, a code. They found a man, a tiny piece of paper, and just forced it into their existing fears. My own digging, though, suggests something else. What if the code, that Tamam Shud note, wasn't something to send but a marker for how to receive something? Think about that time, the late 1940s. Radio was everything, but it could also be easily intercepted. Intel agencies definitely used coded messages, sure, but they also had specific frequencies and times for secret communication. This isn't about some hidden code inside the words Tamam Shud. It's about the situation of that paper, finding it in a hidden pocket, the guy dying mysteriously. It all screams secrecy, but not necessarily the secrecy of a spy sending a message. Here's my take: the code wasn't a message waiting to be cracked, it was a reference to a short-range radio broadcast frequency, a signal. Maybe confirming a meeting or a location. A signal that, for reasons we're still figuring out, got him killed. The investigators missed it because they were looking for a Russian spy with a secret telegram. They weren't looking for an Australian operation, a local contact, or a dead drop gone wrong. That Tamam Shud scrap seen this way isn't some cryptic puzzle. It's a technical note, a frequency, something an operative or someone working with a local contact might carry. And that super neat stitching on the fob pocket? Not to hide a message, but to keep a vital piece of gear or info safe for a scheduled meetup. The phrase Tamam Shud itself, meaning ended or finished in Persian, could totally be a signal that the broadcast or the contact was done. Or maybe that the whole thing ended badly. This totally shifts the focus from some foreign enemy to a possible internal issue. A failure not of breaking enemy codes but of our own counterintelligence. ASIO was super secretive back then, and the Somerton Man investigation, even with their involvement, might have been deliberately kept separate or even misled. Source: Australian Security Intelligence Organisation Act 1979. The official files at the National Archives totally show how much military intel and police were involved, all stumped on identification. Source: National Archives of Australia, but they don't really scream foreign state actor. What they really show is a massive failure to get past the secrecy surrounding this guy's life or his death. We've all been fed the idea that the Somerton Man was just a piece in some global spy game. But what if he was a victim of a much more local and maybe way scarier operation? What if that Tamam Shud note wasn't a spy's secret but a tech guy's frequency? The implications are huge. It means the mystery wasn't about who sent the message but who got it, and why getting it got this man killed on an Australian beach. The official investigation just didn't see the big picture, totally blinded by the Cold War red panic. They were chasing a ghost of a Russian agent when the truth might have been way closer to home, buried deep in the operational playbook of Australia's own intel world. That famous, mysterious scrap of paper. It probably wasn't a code to be cracked, but a key to a short-range radio frequency. A signal, and finding it in the hidden pocket of a dead man suggests that signal led him straight to his doom. So the real question becomes, who was using that frequency? And how was Carl Webb, an electrical engineer from around here, tied into it? The Somerton Man. For ages he was just a ghost. An absolute puzzle that washed up on an Australian beach way back in 1948. His whole story, who he was and why he was there, got lost to the ocean and time. People cooked up all sorts of theories, the most popular one being he was some kind of Soviet spy, a real pro at espionage who got silenced either by his own people or by some rival outfit. But if you really dig into the facts and ditch all the fictional spy stuff, you'll see a totally different picture. It doesn't scream international drama, it actually points more towards some kind of low-key, maybe even everyday, secret operations happening right there. This whole idea about the Soviet spy, as cool as it sounds, just doesn't hold up when you actually look at it. The first investigations, they were really struggling because they didn't have any solid clues, so yeah, they looked at everything. But this claim about Soviet involvement, there's zero real proof. We're talking about no records from KGB files. Now, I know those guys were super secretive, but you'd think something about a big-time operation like that, or what happened afterward, would pop up somewhere. And even more importantly, the whole story about figuring out the Tamam Shud note, which everyone says is proof of some super complex code. Yeah, that's been pretty much shredded by experts. The claims that it was a Soviet code, that was based on bad translations and a whole lot of guessing, not actual code-breaking skills. That key phrase, Tamam Shud, it just means ended or finished in Persian, and it was a pretty common thing to write in poetry. It doesn't magically unlock a spy's secrets all by itself. That little piece of paper they found tucked away in the Somerton Man's secret pocket, the one with the famous Tamam Shud writing on it, that's been the center of so much wild guessing. On top of the words themselves, there were also some letters that looked totally random. For years, people just wrote them off as meaningless scribbles. But if you take a more analytical look, thinking about what was going on back then and what intelligence agencies might have been up to, you get a different idea. It could have been a radio tuning pattern. Just picture what intelligence work was like in the 1940s. Before we had all this digital tech, radio was everything. Secret operations absolutely depended on radio signals for talking to each other, getting intel, and coordinating things. That pattern of letters on the Somerton Man's note, it looks a whole lot like the sequence of frequencies you'd use to tune into specific radio broadcasts. Think of it like a preset radio, a list of numbers that matched up with different radio stations. This isn't some complicated code. It's a practical, though pretty basic, way for a secret operative to make sure they could get to the right communication channels quickly and without fail. This whole idea gets way stronger when you consider the context of how things were done back then. The late 1940s in Australia were a time when security was a really big deal. The brand new Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, or ASIO, was busy building up its capabilities. A lot of what they did is still top secret, of course, but looking at the history of how intelligence worked during that period, it suggests they were setting up experimental surveillance and communication networks all along the Australian coast. Now, these weren't necessarily elaborate spy rings with dozens of agents. They could have been simple places to listen in, spots to bounce signals, or even places where they were testing out broadcast methods or trying to talk to people working undercover in the area. ASIO, just like a lot of spy agencies around the world back then, was trying out new unconventional ways to stay in touch and gather information across a massive, sparsely populated country. So maybe the Somerton Man wasn't the guy running a spy network, but more like a vital part of one. The theory goes that he was acting like a human signal booster, a living antenna for these experimental radio broadcasts. You know those weird number stations, the ones that broadcast coded messages often just in numbers or letters? Those were a common tool for spying. These stations would send out coded messages, and agents needed to be in the right spot at the right time, tuned to the correct frequency to catch them. If the Somerton Man was stationed in a specific spot, maybe even moving along the coast, he could have been tasked with picking up these transmissions and then passing them on somehow, or maybe just waiting for his next set of orders. That hidden pocket with his tuning guide, that would have been his direct line to whoever was calling the shots. The Tamam Shud note in this scenario could actually mean his mission was over, or maybe it was a signal that he was ready to receive the final message. And here's something really crucial. Recent breakthroughs have totally changed how we see who this guy actually was. After a ton of genetic research, including digging him up and doing DNA testing, they figured out the Somerton Man was Carl Webb. He was an electrical engineer from the Melbourne area. This discovery completely blows away the old idea that he was some foreign spy. Plus, Webb's background as an electrical engineer makes it way more believable that he was involved in technical stuff, maybe even radio-related activities. The actual case files, which are kept by the National Archives of Australia, have a mountain of letters back and forth between the police and the military intelligence folks. These papers show just how much trouble any known agency had trying to identify the guy. It really suggests that if he was involved in any kind of intelligence work, it was way outside the usual ways they identified people, or maybe his role was just super well hidden. Finding that scrap of paper with the Tamam Shud writing on it, which was reported in the original police stories by the advertiser back in 1948, that's when the whole mystery really kicked off. What seemed like a cryptic clue pointing to a foreign agent might actually be something much simpler, but still really fascinating. It could be evidence pointing to a more local experimental intelligence operation. That string of letters, when you look at it with the idea of radio tuning and secret communications in mind, stops being just a confusing mess and turns into a potential key. Not to some grand Soviet plot, but to Australia's own early experimental intelligence networks. Alright, let's dig into this next section, shall we? It's where things start getting really uncomfortable. So the official story they fed everyone, it painted this guy as some foreign spook, a relic from the Cold War days. But you know how it goes with these kinds of mysteries, right? The truth, it was way closer to home than anyone wanted to admit. And get this, the actual investigation files themselves practically scream about this internal mess. They've got pages and pages of letters back and forth between the cops and military intelligence, all talking about how nobody could figure out who this dude was. Source: National Archives of Australia. I mean, this wasn't just some foreigner they couldn't ID, it was like they couldn't ID anybody. Weird, huh? Honestly, chasing that foreign spy angle, especially with all the Soviet jitters back then, it totally blinded them. It was just an easy story to tell, right? Fit perfectly with all the global paranoia. But what if the real danger wasn't coming from outside? What if it was someone inside cleaning house, shutting up people who knew too much? This darker idea, it's all tied up in that weird little scrap of paper. They found it tucked away in his hidden pocket with Tamam Shud written on it. At first, everyone figured it was a suicide note or some spy's last message, you know. Source: The Advertiser, 1948 archive. But as you pull on this thread, the whole thing starts to point to something way more chilling. That code wasn't some spy message, it was a kill order. Fast forward to 2022, they exhumed the body, ran some DNA tests, and bam, they identified him as Carl Webb, just a regular local electrical engineer. Source: Science Magazine. Now, that blows the whole foreign operative theory right out of the water. But surprise, surprise, it doesn't actually solve anything. Instead, it just makes it way weirder, hinting at a much nastier reason he ended up dead. And get this, Professor Derek Abbott's genetic research backs this up, saying the guy was most likely from around Melbourne, not some foreign agent like everyone thought. Source: University of Adelaide research report. So Carl Webb, this seemingly normal guy, turns out to be just a pawn in some much bigger, and honestly pretty twisted game. Back in the late 1940s and beyond, Australia's intelligence agencies were super secretive, all about plausible deniability. Source: Australian Security Intelligence Organisation Act 1979. When you look at it through that lens, it makes sense how someone could just vanish without a trace. Especially if they were a threat to national security, or more accurately, to the security of the folks running the spy show. And poisoning? That was a go-to move, especially with obscure poisons, made it look like natural causes or some mystery illness. Super hard to trace. The fact that they couldn't nail down a cause of death in Webb's original autopsy, even with all the digging they did, yeah, that totally fits this dark playbook. The last really important piece of this whole puzzle, you find it when you look at that supposed radio code they found with the Somerton Man stuff. Now, nobody's publicly cracked it for sure, but the way these codes are structured and the situation, that's where it gets crucial. When you compare how these codes usually work with what might be going on with the Somerton Man's code, and then you factor in ASIO's old operational manuals, well, it suggests a really disturbing link. These weren't the fancy ciphers of spies playing international games, these were quick, to-the-point signals for internal cleanup jobs. The fact that these kinds of tactics were used, the way they deliberately wiped out his identity and ultimately silenced him, it all points to one horrifying conclusion: Carl Webb wasn't killed by some foreign enemy. Nope, he was a disposable asset taken out by his own country's secret services. That Tamam Shud wasn't the end of the story, it was the order to end it. Man, the silence around the Somerton Man case, even after all these years, it's just loud, really loud. And what's up with those Australian government archives, especially the ones about national security? Why are they still under lock and key? You see, the National Archives of Australia, they've got all this correspondence, between the cops and military intelligence. It really makes you think there was way more going on than just trying to figure out who the guy was. Source: National Archives of Australia. This whole hush-hush thing for so long, it kinda points to the Somerton Man being more than just some random dude nobody could ID. Maybe he was just a pawn, a disposable piece in some massive game of international chess. Back in the late 1940s, Australian intelligence agencies had these super-secretive operational rules, and the ASIO Act spells it out. It gives you a historical backdrop for why this sort of shadowy stuff could have gone down. Source: Australian Security Intelligence Organisation Act 1979. Now, get this. Some recent DNA studies are saying the guy was probably Carl Webb from Melbourne. That totally throws a wrench in the earlier ideas about him being some foreign spy, right? Source: University of Adelaide Research Report Science Magazine. But still, those nagging questions, the files that are still secret, and that original police report talking about the Tamam Shud thing found in his secret pocket. Source: The Advertiser. They just keep everybody guessing. So the Somerton Man's whole story, it's basically a monument to unanswered questions and the government being really cagey. We're actually inviting you to take a look at this ASIO document that just got declassified. It's linked down below in the description, so check it out. Really dig into it, try to piece things together, and come up with your own ideas about this mystery that just won't go away.